The bitter wind cut across the Wyoming Valley like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, carrying with it the weight of another harsh winter. Ethan Rollins stood on the wide porch of his ranch house, his eyes fixed on the fiery sunset sinking behind the jagged mountains. At 32, he was the richest rancher for miles, owner of 5,000 acres and more cattle than most men could dream of. His house was filled with fine things from Denver and beyond: Persian rugs, crystal lamps, books bound in leather, yet none of it filled the hollow ache in his chest. It had been 3 years since the fever took Sarah, his wife, and little James. 3 years since he buried them on the hill behind the cottonwoods. He had thrown himself into work, building his empire bigger and stronger, trying to outrun the silence that echoed in every room of the great house. But as the shadows stretched long across the land, Ethan knew he was not running anymore. He was standing still, haunted. Mr. Rollins." The timid voice drew him back. He turned and saw her in the doorway. Clara Bennett, the new maid who had arrived 3 weeks ago from Ohio. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her wheat-colored hair was pinned back in a neat bun, her gray eyes downcast, as though meeting his gaze would break some rule. She held her shawl close around her shoulders, her plain brown dress making her look even smaller in the doorway. "Yes, Miss Bennett. Supper's ready, sir," Mrs. Henderson said. "To tell you, it's beef stew tonight with fresh bread." Ethan nodded, but made no move to come inside. Clara shifted her weight from one foot to the other, nervous like a rabbit caught out in the open. "Will you be taking it in the dining room, sir, or—" She trailed off, her voice fading into the cold evening air. "The study," Ethan said at last. "I have ledgers to review." "Yes, sir." She dipped a small curtsy and disappeared back inside. He lingered on the porch, watching the first stars flicker into life. He wondered why this shy maid, who barely spoke above a whisper, lingered in his thoughts at all. Perhaps it was her quietness, a mirror of his own solitude. Perhaps it was the way she moved about the house, efficient yet almost invisible, like she was afraid to take up space. Inside, the fire crackled in the study as Ethan took his seat at the great oak desk. Shelves of books lined the walls, though he rarely opened them. Numbers filled his nights instead, columns of cattle sales, land purchases, profits. Wealth meant control. Wealth meant no one could take what little he had left. Clara entered with a tray. She moved carefully, setting down the steaming bowl of stew, the cloth-wrapped bread, and a glass of water. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed each item just so, like the smallest mistake would bring down thunder on her head. "Thank you," Ethan said. She gave a quick nod and turned to leave, but her gaze caught on the portrait above his desk. Sarah in her wedding dress, holding baby James, the only softness left in that room of hardwood and firelight. "You had a beautiful family, sir," Clara said softly, then bit her lip as if she had spoken out of turn. "They were," he answered simply. Clara flushed and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Ethan ate without tasting. His eyes kept drifting to the portrait, then back to the closed door. That night he worked until midnight, his pen scratching numbers across endless pages. But as he climbed the stairs toward his room, a faint sound stopped him. A voice, soft, low, coming from the kitchen. He moved quietly down the hall, stopping outside the door. There she was, washing dishes under the lamplight, her back to him, and she was speaking, not to anyone, but as though the words inside her chest had to spill out into the empty room. "Tomorrow I'll dust the parlor extra well." She murmured, "Mister, Rollins doesn't use it much, but it should be proper, and I'll polish the silver again, even if Mrs. Henderson says once a week is enough. Such fine silver worth more than a papa's store ever was." Her voice trembled, her shoulders shaking slightly. She gripped the edge of the basin. "No crying, Clara Marie," she whispered to herself. "You're lucky to have this roof, these wages. Some girls end up worse. Mr. Rollins is fair, even if he looks so sad. Those eyes like he's staring at ghosts." Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped back into the shadows. Ghosts. That's what she saw in him, what he had become. The next night he waited in his study. This time he let the fire burn low, sat back in his chair, loosened his collar, and let his eyes close. To anyone entering, he would look like a man asleep after a long day's work. The door creaked open. Clara's light steps crossed the floor. She paused at his desk, gathering dishes onto her tray. Then she came closer. Ethan felt the brush of soft hands as she pulled the blanket from the back of his chair and draped it gently over him. "Poor man," she whispered, "working yourself to exhaustion. Won't bring them back." "I know. I tried it myself." Ethan nearly opened his eyes, but he kept still, breathing steady. Clara moved to the hearth, coaxing the dying fire back to life. She lingered at the portrait. "You had a beautiful family, Mr. Rollins," she said softly. "I hope you find peace some day. The way you look at them when you think no one's watching, it breaks my heart. I know what it's like to lose everything, but you're still here, still breathing. That must count for something." She turned to go, pausing one last time beside his chair. "Sleep well, sir. Tomorrow's a new day." The door closed with a gentle click. Ethan sat unmoving, the warmth of the fire seeping back into the room, but his thoughts burning hotter. This shy girl who hid in silence during the day carried a depth he had not expected, and her kindness, the blanket, the fire, the words, had pierced the cold armor he had built around his heart. For the first time in years, Ethan Rollins wondered about tomorrow. The days that followed only deepened Ethan's curiosity. Every evening after supper, he left the dishes untouched on his desk, loosened his collar, and settled into his chair as if sleep had claimed him. And every night, just past 11, Clara came. Sometimes she spoke to herself as she tidied, soft thoughts about chores, about the way the parlor curtains caught the sunlight, about her mother's lessons in keeping a house. Sometimes she simply moved in silence, her touch gentle as she added wood to the fire or straightened his blanket. But every night, without fail, she lingered at the portrait of Sarah and James. On the third night, she placed a small tin on the side table. "Your hands, Mr. Rollins," she whispered, brushing her fingers across the tin. "They're cracked from the cold. Mama used to make this sound from beeswax and herbs. I hope you don't mind." I thought maybe it would help. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to thank her, to tell her he wasn't asleep. But something held him back. He didn't want to break the spell. Not yet. By the fifth night, Clara's voice had grown more open, almost confessional. "Mrs. Henderson says, 'You built all this with your own hands,'" she murmured, wiping down his already neat desk. "Papa would have admired that. He always said America was where a man could make himself into anything. Of course, he said that about his investments too, and we all know how that ended." Her voice cracked and she quickly added, "Still, I'm grateful for this place. Some girls on the train with me weren't so lucky. One went to a dance hall in Denver. She cried the whole last day, knowing what kind of job it was. That could have been me if not for you." Ethan clenched his hands into fists beneath the blanket. How had he never noticed before how much strength this timid girl carried in her slight frame? But on the seventh night, everything changed. Clara entered as usual, carrying her tray, but her steps were unsteady. Her face, flushed in the firelight, glistened with sweat. She set the tray down with trembling hands and swayed. "Just a little fever," she whispered. "Finish the chores, Clara. Don't be weak." When she stumbled, Ethan could no longer pretend. He surged forward, catching her before she fell. "Miss Bennet!" His voice startled her. Her gray eyes widened with shock and shame. "You were awake," she gasped. "All this time you knew." "You're burning up," Ethan interrupted, steadying her. "You shouldn't be on your feet." Quote, "I'm fine," she protested weakly. "Please don't trouble Mrs. Henderson if she thinks I can't work." "Sit," Ethan commanded, guiding her into the chair opposite his own. His tone broke no argument. Moments later, Mrs. Henderson arrived, her sharp eyes taking one look at Clara before clucking her tongue. "Fever. I knew you looked pale at supper." Clara shrank into herself. "I didn't want to be a burden." "Be burden," the housekeeper barked. "Girl, nearly working yourself into the grave isn't a kindness to anyone." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Send Tom for Dr. Morrison." "Now," Mrs. Henderson blinked. "At this hour for a servant's fever, for one of my people," Ethan said firmly. "Send him." Clara's cheeks flamed. "You must think me foolish talking to you while you pretended to sleep." Saying all those things, Ethan's gaze softened. "Not foolish. Kind. Kinder than I deserved." She lowered her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The doctor arrived an hour later, muttering about midnight calls. After examining Clara, he straightened with a sigh. Exhaustion, underweight, overworked herself. Nothing rest and proper food won't cure. She'll live if she stays in bed. He gave Ethan a long, knowing look. "Strange to see you so concerned for a maid, Rollins, but good to see you care about something beyond cattle and ledgers again." When Clara was settled in her small room, Ethan lingered, staring at the little tin of salve she had made for him. A maid with nothing to her name had noticed his pain and sought to ease it. The gesture humbled him. For 3 days, Clara remained in bed by his order, despite her protests. She fretted about lost work, about being a burden, about losing her position. "Girl doesn't understand kindness," Mrs. Henderson said. "Been kicked too many times to expect anything else." On the 4th day, Ethan knocked gently on her door. Clara sat propped on pillows, sewing despite her power. At the sight of him, she tried to rise, but he waved her back. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling a chair close. "Much better, sir. I'll be back to work tomorrow, I promise. You'll return when Dr. Morrison says you're ready." Not before he paused, then took a breath. "I owe you an apology." Clara's brow furrowed. "For what?" "For deceiving you, pretending to sleep, listening when I should not have." She flushed crimson. "Then you heard everything." "Everything?" he admitted. "Oh, how mortifying," she whispered, covering her face. "Not mortifying," he said softly, illuminating. "Clara, your kindness reminded me that simple compassion still exists in this world. You've done more for me in a few weeks than wealth or land ever could." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I know what loss feels like, Mr. Rollins. I only wanted you not to feel so alone." He reached for her hand, his voice low and rough. You'll do no more scrubbing floors. When you're well, I'd like you to be head maid. Better wages, lighter duties. You've earned it." Her lips parted in shock. "But I've only been here 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, you've shown more heart than most do in a lifetime." He rose to leave, but she stopped him with a whisper. "Mr. Rollins, were you truly awake every night?" He allowed a small smile. Every night she buried her face in her hands with a groan. But Ethan walked away with something stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The storm that tested that hope came weeks later. A February blizzard rolled down from the mountains without warning, burying the valley in snow and howling winds. Ethan rode out to check the pregnant cows, but the storm struck faster than expected. Hours later, half frozen, he staggered back to the ranch, his body more ice than flesh. The kitchen door flew open, and Clara was there. "Mr. Rollins!" she cried, her face white with fear. She caught his arm as he nearly collapsed, dragging him into the blessed warmth. His hands were white, waxy, nearly frostbitten. Clara knelt before him without hesitation, chafing them between her own. "Oh, no," she whispered fiercely. "Not you, not like this. Hold on." For the next hour she and Mrs. Henderson fought to warm him, spooning broth past his chattering teeth, rubbing life back into his frozen limbs. When the pain came, a burning agony as blood returned. Clara never let go of his hands. "You're safe," she whispered, holding him close against her warmth. "You're home. Sleep now." Ethan drifted into unconsciousness, with her voice anchoring him. And when he woke, sunlight on his face. The first thing he saw was Clara dozing in a chair by his bedside, her hand still wrapped around his. For the first time since Sarah and James, Ethan Rollins felt truly alive. Spring arrived slow that year, the snow melting into streams that cut through the Wyoming Valley, leaving the land fresh and green once more. The ranch bustled with new life, calves stumbling on unsteady legs, wild flowers dotting the fields, and a sense of renewal in the air. For Ethan Rollins, it was not just the land that was changing, it was his heart. He had lived too long in the shadow of grief, closing himself off, believing no sunlight could ever reach him again. But Clara Bennett had walked quietly into his house, into his life, and with her gentle hands and quiet words, she had broken through walls that wealth and work could never tear down. Every day he found himself seeking her presence. At first, it was small things, asking her opinion on the arrangement of flowers in the parlor, or lingering a little longer when she brought tea. But soon it was more. One afternoon he found her mending a shirt by the window, her face lit by the warm glow of the sun. He stopped in the doorway, watching silently until she looked up. "Startled Mr. Rollins?" she asked, her cheeks flushing Ethan. He corrected softly, her hands still illed on the fabric. "I couldn't. I shouldn't. You've cared for me more honestly than anyone has in years," he said, stepping closer. "If anyone has the right to call me by name, it's you." Her lips trembled, but she whispered, "Ethan." It was the sweetest sound he had heard in a long time. One evening, the valley gathered for a barn dance at a neighboring ranch. Music filled the air, fiddles and laughter carrying across the night. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, his fine coat and boots marking him as the richest man there. Yet he felt strangely apart. That was until he saw Clara. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but in Ethan's eyes she was the brightest star in the room. She stood off to the side, uncertain, her hands clasped tightly. A group of young men glanced her way, but none approached. She was too quiet, too guarded. Ethan crossed the floor without hesitation. "Miss Bennet," he said, offering his hand, "would you grant me this dance?" Her eyes widened. "Oh, no, I couldn't. Everyone will stare." "Let them." His voice was firm but kind. "Please," she hesitated, then slowly placed her hand in his. The music swelled, and Ethan led her across the floor. At first, her steps were clumsy, her face flushed with nerves, but Ethan's steady hand guided her, and soon she was laughing. An unguarded, joyous sound that turned every head in the barn. For a moment, Ethan felt the weight of his grief lift, replaced by something new, something bright. When the song ended, the crowd clapped and Clara tried to pull away, but Ethan held her hand. "One more," he asked softly. She met his gaze, her gray eyes shining. One more, but not everyone approved. Whispers began to spread. Through town, the wealthy rancher and the maid. Folks said Clara was reaching above her station, that Ethan was blinded by loneliness. Some called her a fortune seeker. Clara heard the whispers in the market, felt the stares at church. She shrank beneath them, her old fears creeping back. One evening, she packed a small bag, intending to slip away before dawn. But when she opened the door, Ethan was already there, standing in the dim light of the hall. "You were leaving," he said quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't bring shame to your name. People are talking. Let them talk." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with emotion. "Clara, I've spent years living for what people thought, for appearances or for respectability, and it left me empty. You brought me back to life. I won't lose that because of gossip." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You deserve someone your equal." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I already found her. My equal isn't measured in wealth or land. It's measured in heart. And Clara, yours is stronger than anyone I've ever known." Her breath caught, her body trembling. "Ethan!" He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Stay. Please build a life here with me. Not as a maid, as my partner, as my wife." Clara's tears turned to quiet sobs against his chest, but she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The wedding was small, held beneath the cottonwood trees where Sarah and James rested. Ethan spoke their names softly before the ceremony, asking their blessing. The wind stirred the branches gently, as if answering. Clara stood in a simple white dress, her hands trembling in his as they said their vows. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with the promise of a new beginning. The valley would talk, of course, but Ethan no longer cared. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Clara, once a shy maid, hiding her pain, now stood at his side as his equal, his partner, his love. Together they faced the wide-open west, not as two broken souls, but as one. And in the quiet of the ranch house that night, Ethan whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow is a new day." Clara smiled, her head resting on his chest. "Yes," she said softly, "and this time we'll face it." If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It really helps me keep making videos like this. Leave a comment below and tell me which moment stuck with you most. Ethan on the porch, Clara's quiet kindness at the hearth, the blizzard rescue, or their wedding beneath the cottonwoods. I read every message and I love hearing your thoughts. Share any favorite lines, questions, or suggestions for future stories, and feel free to pass this video along to a friend who'd enjoy a slow burn Western romance. If you want more, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. And thanks so much for watching. Your support means everything.